Justin. Okay, ready? And then here's Travis. Paul.
It's all on there.
Yes.
You have a quorum then. Just if you take any votes, you'll have to do. a voice vote.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Perfect.
Hey, good evening.
Paul. Paul.
We're gonna start, is that okay?
Yeah, I was just waiting for Travis to jump on, but there he is right there. I'm gonna take you away, Chair.
Welcome to the July 22nd, 2024 meeting of the Mobility Planning and Coordination Committee. As a reminder, this meeting is being broadcast to the town's YouTube channel and also via Zoom and being recorded by the Observer and is being recorded for publication, later viewing, and administrative purposes. I haven't been notified by anybody else other than the Observer that they're recording the meeting. So we'll take a roll call. Tim Bolger, Chair, is present. Mo Handel here. Justin McCullen,
Here.
Paul Malta,
Here,
Tyler Gabrielski,
Here.
Shane Mark,
Here.
and Karis.
Karis, we're doing the roll call.
Great, I'm here.
Alexander Clee. Present-
Yes.
Present, yeah, and Travis Pollock on Zoom from MAPC. And so the first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from June 10th, 2024. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
Any adjustments or questions? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. So moved.
Second motion. Oh, I'm not a voting member, sorry.
second the motion.
And then I'll take a roll call vote. Chair votes aye.
I, Mo Handel, vote.
Justin
Aye.
McCollum,
I'm gonna abstain, so I don't think I was at that meeting, but
All vote aye.
okay, is that enough? Can I approve that without the vote of three
You don't need all you need is a majority.
majority?
It's a ministerial act, but that's not our
All right,
action.
okay.
yeah, you're fine with that.
All right, so approved. And so the next item is the update on the transportation master scoping assistance from Travis. And Travis, good to see you. Give us an update on where we are.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I will share my screen. I think I should have those privileges. Just give me a second. I'm going to try to do that. I take it you can see that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks again for having me. Again, Travis Pollock, Metropolitan Area Planning Council, the regional planning agency for Greater Boston. I'm here to give an update on the street design and policy guideline scope of work that I'm working on with the town. So just as a quick reminder, the purpose of this is to provide that we are, as the MAPC, are providing technical assistance to develop the scope of work that will help the town to then select the vendor to assist the town in creating this and adopting a street design and policy guide. And the first few steps that we've done is One is looking at existing conditions in the town in terms of the streets and traffic and other data. And then number two is looking at similar street design guides and policy guides from places such as Newton and Charlotte, North Carolina, where actually I worked for some 20 some years, and in Minneapolis as well, to see what they're doing and see how it could apply. And from that, I'll go over some things that just some highlights from that, and then I'll talk about the tasks in the scope of work that we're starting to put together and get any feedback. So in terms of the the key points from the existing conditions data that we looked at, one is that the streets that are closer to, as you might expect, streets that are closer to I-95 have higher traffic volumes, like on Highland Avenue and Kendrick Street. These might have different classifications when this is all done. There's areas that have some different land uses. One of the ones that I noted is we noted is light industrial area, an office area that's at Kendrick Street near 128 that has some truck traffic, but it's also transitioning to some office and multifamily. You have some great Plain Avenue, Highland Avenue. Those are key connectors, and so thinking about ways those can be made safer for pedestrian, bike, as well as vehicular traffic will be key. It's been noted that Greendale Avenue is a cut through for some traffic because it parallels 128. So we have to think about how we can discourage that cut through and make sure that's safe. Looking at crash data, we're noticing that ped bike crashes are going up and crashes are not going down. This is not unique to this town. This is something that we're seeing across the Commonwealth, unfortunately, although Massachusetts is better than in terms of the national average for crashes or a per capita on a per vehicle miles traveled basis. The trends are not in showing that things are getting safer, especially for vulnerable users. So we have to think about that. And there's really a need for more sidewalks and safer connections overall. In terms of other things we've noted, there are some key employment clusters in the area. Those should be mapped early to understand the traffic situations there. While we do have the employment situation, as perhaps is not surprising to many people, work from home, which is that WFH, that's really increased. And it's not that people are always working from home or that people are always in the office. We're seeing a lot more hybrid work, which is creating a different traffic patterns these days. Again, not unique to this town, something we're seeing nationally, something we're seeing across Massachusetts. So we have to think about ways that if people then decide to take those trips during the day, if they do decide to drive, can they park once, walk and bike more, or walk more? You have to think about street maintenance as the streets become more complex with more sidewalks, more bicycle facilities, or there's more trails or more things that make these streets complete and safer for all users. A maintenance plan should be thought about in terms of how that's done. But really, the town does have some good assets in terms of there's a lot of good street connectivity, areas that are within walking distance in terms of housing and retail, and you have transit assets in the town. The town has a good complete streets prioritization policy and plan. There's been some good studies on townwide pedestrian safety and parking. Those really should help shape the policy and can be used. Then the policy guide can then help shape those efforts as those move forward as well. So in terms of, just before I get into the scope of work, I'll pause in a second, but in terms of what we've also noted in similar policy design guidelines, again, looking at some of the other ones that are similar, it should be the first that makes streets functional for all users. If they have transit, that should be considered, but also walking, cycling, rolling. We have to think about people that are maybe on mobility devices as well as for how can we make sure it's safe for people that drive. It should advance the adopted policies, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the streets, complete streets, even the parking that was mentioned downtown, expanding sidewalk network. It should also advance safety. We have a regional safety Vision Zero plan that's underway in the greater Boston area to get not to reduce all crashes. That is not the goal, but to reduce, and get down to zero the number of deaths and serious injuries due to crashes. And that's really key in terms of making sure the roads are safe for all. Understand that people make mistakes. People can be distracted, people that are walking, people that are driving, but how can we make sure that if there is a collision, no one is seriously hurt, and no one dies. And that really leads to better things such as better street design, which is exactly what the policy should do. It should be integrated with your local zoning, land uses, recognizing there's going to be different street designs for different types of streets in different areas. It should think about intersections. Those are key points where streets come together, as well as the connections with trails and streets that are regional, that carries some regional traffic. From looking at other street design guides, it's really first to set the classification for the streets. Again, based upon where those connections are, what the development is, what the available right-of-way is, thinking about the variations that should be designed for the different land uses, and then set the design elements for each of those, including intersections.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah,
How is this, do you have any examples of how this is reflected in zoning? That we could look at some point, not necessarily for tonight, but in general?
so, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just so that the planning board could look at that when they propose zoning, that would be a nice reference for them.
Okay, yeah, let me make a note of that, because I think there are a couple of them that talk about how the zoning plays into that.
Thank you.
Before I go on with some of the tasks, are there any other questions at this time on either the existing conditions that I talked about, or examples from other similar design guidelines?
Sure, in there you noted a need for more sidewalks. You know, like, where did that come from? Like, where are we identifying, like, where's the gap, I guess?
Well, one thing I noted that in terms of, there are some streets that don't have sidewalks. We do have data on that. We do have data on which areas don't have sidewalks on both sides of the streets. I know there has been some work in terms of where sidewalks maybe the maintenance is still needed, or it needs to be improved. You know, I didn't have a chance to go to, for example, evaluate every single sidewalk in the town, but just thinking about where having sidewalks on both sides of the streets is needed, especially in areas maybe where you have children walking to school. We want to make sure we have that. So
There's also been an issue with respect to eliminating sidewalks in places where they're not used. I don't know if that ever gets reflected in any of this, because the town has, I think, over the years, looked at that issue.
It was also something that we were working on here, I guess, or talking about. Early stages is about, removing the possibility of removing sidewalks where
Redundant.
they're redundant or other reasons, I guess, that we're trying to work out.
Okay.
Yeah, the idea there is that, as we continue to build out pedestrian infrastructure throughout town, in order to control, the inventory so that we have, the ability to responsibly maintain the infrastructure. There are residential areas in which sidewalks on both sides could be considered redundant, and there's a program in the beginning stages of formation that would create an avenue for these residential areas to sort of get prioritized in terms of maintenance for one side of the sidewalk in exchange for removal of the other side. So infrastructure inventory management actually might be a good sort of extra piece to have in here to keep in mind, because all of the additional infrastructure that we plan to build in the coming years, based off of the things that we're going to find in this street design guide, we have to also have a feasible maintenance plan And that has to be kept in mind for that additional infrastructure. Just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, okay,
Which I think we've noted the maintenance in there as well, I think, in the bullet points. It's-
Right.
Travis-
Yeah, I think, yeah, there's, maybe a little outside the scope of this project, but things like, certain specialized infrastructure would require more specialized equipment to maintain. So it's something that we think about on the DPW side.
appreciate that feedback. Yeah, I think that's really important to know, so we'll reflect that in the scope of work.
We're discussing it too, so it's, you know, in the coming months or year, maybe we'll have more information on that. It's,
Yeah, so yeah, we're not, it hasn't been built out yet, but that's the idea behind it.
Okay.
I do have a few notes from James, who wasn't able to make the meeting tonight. That I just want to make sure that, are on the record. He had mentioned that you know, I saw up there, you know, Vision Zero, traffic safety, you know, advance those goals. But he had mentioned that we might want to tie it more directly to design decisions, to enhance safety for pedestrians and cyclists. So, you know, it's kind of like, the goals that guide the process, but also making sure that those are tied in for safety considerations at the design level. Does that make sense?
Yes. In terms of, and maybe, as I talk about the scope of work, you can tell me if we're maybe hitting that as well in terms of what he mentioned. I think I understand it, but
Okay, yeah, so maybe we'll let you have the floor and then we'll discuss.
was there, any, I think I saw a hand raised, but it looks like it's down, so. Okay, I'll move forward. In terms of the scope of work. Now, again, this is would appreciate feedback on what there are. We've got about 7 tasks. They're outlined here. I thought if we could get this down in terms of it might make sense, then we can scope it out. And then from that, you know, I think as you move forward, what I've seen previously is often when we do a scope of work, things can, obviously there'll be some iteration on whether or not this is meeting overall goals and vision. But in terms of the scope of work, I think first is that it's the consultant should determine like what is the purpose of the guide, which I think we're just talking about now, like what is the purpose of it broadly, and then think about how you know what it will do and how it will do it. And then that will shape really the classification, design elements, and then the goals and metrics that are the later tasks. And I can see this as something as policies and the design guideline goes along, it will then, I think, tweak the purpose of the guide. So again, I see this a bit of probably a bit of an iterative process. But I think it's important to think about just very clearly, let's lay out like what the consultant, as a consultant can help the town think of like what is, let's put this down on pen and paper. What is the purpose of the guide? And then that will shape the following tasks. The second task is really develop those policies, goals, and metrics that are most important for the town, like what was just talked about in terms of the maintenance plan and how that can then think about prioritization of sidewalks, maybe eliminating sidewalks or designing streets that are maybe safe for all users without sidewalks. Once that is established, those policies, you can then develop the metrics to determine how those move forward. I think it's good to have metrics to determine, is the town meeting goals? These things such as the conditions of sidewalks, types of trails, the crashes, as we talked about, speeding, and what we call sometimes in the industry mode shift. Are there more people walking, cycling, working from home? Because when you shift mode, that means less traffic, less cut through traffic, less speeding, and those vehicular traffic volumes. So these are just examples. I'm not saying that these have to be the kind of things that can be used to measure policy or measure progress. But I think it's important early on or when the plan is developed to have some things that the town can easily, looking at existing data every couple of years, saying, are we making progress, or do we need to tweak the policy? Do we need to tweak the goals because certain things are more important than others? So the next tasks are to then have the consultant look at those existing conditions and where the policies are currently in current plans. Look at the zoning, the districts, that sidewalk network or trail network, the ped and bike network. What are the areas where you have environmental justice areas and other vulnerable users, such as there are some households where there's people that don't have any car, or maybe they have one vehicle, or there are areas such as senior housing where people cannot drive, or even young people. Think about young people in terms of teenagers that don't drive yet, and how do they, get to school? How do they get to after school activities, and possibly on their own? Again, those key connections are important. Safety, in terms of, again, the fatalities and serious injuries. When you have, I think the good ideas on terms of what the guide is going to do, what the policies are, what the goals are, what the existing conditions are, then that helps to develop the next step, which is the functional classification. What are the types of streets that are needed in terms of, by looking at the traffic, those connections, the zoning and land use, thinking again about people that don't drive in terms of how are they getting around, and possible ideas that if the town, for example, wants to build out a trail network, what would be the design guidelines for that trail? Or if it's something that is separated bicycle lane, or maybe a shared use path, what could that be? Or if it's maybe more of like a slow street, what would that look like as well? Slow streets are things where it's for all users, but the car doesn't go as in terms of the same rate of speed as it might be on a regular street. The cars slow down because it's a street that is designed for all users to be on the street. Once let me go back here. So once the classification is done, that really then leads to those design elements like we're talking about for each classification. The guidelines should be very clear in terms of what they are. It should be written really plainly, again, with visuals. I think, for example, the Newton guide, if you've seen that, I think is really good. Other ones are really good at laying out visuals as that this is what it possibly, this is what it should look like or could look like in general, in terms of maybe like a street width, how the radius is for like at an intersection. It really should think about specific areas like we've talked about. Maybe the downtown classifications would be different, for example, from something that's closer to those industrial areas on 128, or maybe like a historic area or areas around schools where you definitely want to look out for safety of children. What's really important, I think, for that I heard early on, and I think this makes sense, is that the plan should be not just something that is a written report, but something that could be online that people can access and understand, and have geographic information system mapping. The Minneapolis one is a really good example of that. Is something that is online. You could look at any street, click on it. You can see what the classification is, what the types of zoning and land uses are. From that, then you can then say, okay, for that type of street, this is the design guide that should generally guide the future development of the street in terms of its infrastructure. I think it's really important to have that element online. Finally, this is not a last task. This is a task that I think is important for any project as it moves along, which is the community engagement, stakeholder engagement. The way I see it, the purpose of engagement is to inform people of why their guide is and the policy framework is being developed, get feedback on what people think what they think of their streets and what they see as the needs are, and then inform residents of the draft proposal, get feedback, and then of course inform them of the final guide and what it will be used for moving forward. The audiences are different. There's transportation committee, residents, the town council, others. Obviously, I would be working with you and others in terms of shaping this as we develop the scope of work. Types of engagement, besides just having meetings or a Zoom like this, obviously a town website is important. I think whenever possible, it's good to just meet with existing groups. That means that people don't have to take an extra set of time. It also helps spread the word so that if you talk to an existing neighborhood group or an existing committee, then they can use that as a launching point to say, oh, by the way, we're doing this. They can get it to other stakeholders that they have and really spread the word and get feedback. One idea we've seen a lot of recently these days is an online survey to get feedback. I think it's a good thing to do. And with that, I'll stop, but those are the main tasks, that I think that we would scope out that then would be used by the town to then do an RFP or a request for proposals, request for, request for proposals for a consultant to then do the, policy guide. So I'll stop there and see if there's any feedback or thoughts.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
Travis, what are the, community engagement, how was that represented in the Newton, version of this plan? Was that part of their guide?
I've put in an ask for the Newtons to how that was used. I haven't received feedback yet. I think, you know, I see it as this is the community engagement helps inform it. And then it can be used to you know, to inform, not only shape the plan, but then inform residents and help them understand how to use the plan or how it will be used. I can try to find out more, Tyler. So.
Yeah, no, I think it's kind of a key element because there was some discussion earlier as to. Earlier in this process as to how much community engagement there should be, because we want to be careful not to. Sort of widen the scope to specific streets and what should be on specific streets and things like that, so.
Okay.
My feeling is that it would be, I like this framework. I think I think as long as it stays kind of general in terms of like goal setting and based around, informing people of what we're doing and what's going into the guide. But I guess we just need to make clear that we're not redesigning all the streets in town.
Okay. Yeah.
So do you agree with that?
But are you just, think I'm still wrapping my head around this all. Are you classifying all the streets in town?
Yes,
Okay,
but it'll have a menu
Yes.
of treatments that would be, based on other similar streets. That would be appropriate. It wouldn't necessarily say, this is the ideal design for this particular street. It would say,
okay,
say the categories were red, blue, and green. It would say red, you can put, based on the specification, there can be protected bike lanes, there can be, sidewalks of a certain dimension. Blue, maybe not as much, and then you would kind of put all of those streets in those buckets rather than say, Webster Street, we recommend A, B, and C.
Okay,
It'll be
thank
more
you.
tied to the categories. So that's my reading of it.
Yeah.
makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me too.
As we reconstruct a street or we touch it, we go to the guide.
Yeah,
This is, kind of what's going on. I'm proactively going out and changing everything based on the guide, just when there's work to be done, just looking at it. And
yeah.
this is what applies
Mhm.
to this.
It'll be like the sort of starting point from which we'll plan what to do.
Just a off the wall question. Do any of the ones that we've looked at deal with the work of utilities in the streets? And whether or not this guideline should speak to what we would tell a utility,
In terms of,
what they're doing in the street?
Are you thinking like polls and that sort of thing?
Yes, ma'am.
That just came up with one of our projects of having a poll, poll conflicts being one of the items.
I don't remember
Yeah.
seeing that in any of them. I read them.
Because I think that's a challenge we face in this town if you drive around and look at the situation with both.
yeah,
I could say significant issues that come up in front of us, in front of the TSC, is visibility issues. And one of the biggest issues that we have are the utility double polling, in which I know there's There's solutions on the horizon, maybe, et cetera, incentives to, and timelines, et cetera, but that's, that's a significant issue, especially in some of our minor collectors, local roads, that have, some curves, and that does put a play into it. I don't know how that would fit into like the categorization of the red, green, blue, but nonetheless, that is something that is a concern in this town. I think it's not just, Needham, but yeah.
I think
Right.
in the design guideline that we're looking for, the final end product, asking them to make some recommendations about how to accommodate utilities within the right of way would be
Right.
helpful, particularly if we're looking for a full like build out in a more developed area where you're going to have a bike lane, you're going to have a sidewalk, you're going to have roadway, you're going to have parking. We know that utility poles, as well as trees and other obstructions, can sometimes be in conflict. And then I also think maybe helping provide some guidance in how to factor that into our calculus as to how to develop that road, right? Because, we just had the work done on Dedham Avenue where we had to adjust for the fact that we had 3 poles that were going to be in the bike lane that we were about to build, knowing that Verizon had like a 6-month plus timeline to be able to actually relocate those poles. So it does make executing a guideline like that may be more challenging or needs to be adapted around. So I think that would be helpful.
Thanks for that feedback.
Yeah, I think it's tough to not, I don't think it's necessarily reasonable for the consultants to analyze every individual street and where the poles are and how treatments might conflict. But maybe it's a factor, if the treatment that's recommended for a given category, includes, changes off of the existing, going up onto the sidewalk or something like that, that could be a factor that's a consideration in that category.
It's more prospective than retrospective.
Exactly, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Like,
Do they ever replace a pole proactively? Like, is it ever replaced and moved and put somewhere else, or is it where they are is where they are until
We-
they're asked to move
We
somewhere
have
else?
2 right now on, is it Brookside, Tyler?
Yeah.
That the police and the utility has identified as being a hazard. So they're moving it. And I think it's been 1.5 years it's in process. So it's a very, I'm not trying to give them credit where it isn't due, but it is a very complicated process because each utility on the pole is a completely different entity and a completely different union. So, and they have to be done in a certain order, which is one of the reasons why. And if they don't show up, then the next person comes in and then they can't do it. So, it is complicated on their end, but I think it would be helpful for us when we're looking at doing like just even our pavement preservation program and we're going into a neighborhood knowing, okay, it's classified as a, what we said, red, blue, green, right? Like it's a blue road. We'd like to have this on a blue road, but here are the conflict points. And knowing a couple of years out, especially if we do have to do something like move a pole, then we can put those work orders in the 1 to 2 years in advance that we have to in order to execute it. Or we could say, oh no, this is, we only want to build on one side of the road because of it. So I think it might just be helpful to put it in as part of the design guideline to know
Okay.
How to consider them.
Right.
I don't know if they're proactively moving the poles. It could just be that
Well,
those are the ones we don't notice because they're not a problem.
like, would there be a reason that they would have to like pick up a pole and move it somewhere? And if they were going to, and we would say, well, according to our guide, if you're gonna put this pole back in, it needs to be like 5 feet that way, like not
Yeah.
here, right next to the.
I guess if the pole got like completely knocked down, they might be like, oh, maybe it doesn't make sense to put it this close to the street this time, but.
And Tim, I believe our grant of location process also gives us some level of control when they replace a pole. So that does give us some discretion. They have to come to the town in order to get permission to move the pole. So we can, I guess, nudge them in a specific direction as part of that process.
So only one pole, right? Like it's many different poles, but.
Right. One other thing that James had asked about that I wanna, clarify, so. In the scope, it talks about, or one of the existing. Policies and programs that would be featured, referenced in the street design guide would be the complete streets prioritization plan. James wanted some clarity as to, is this being actively implemented? When is it updated? Would it be helpful to develop a new one? So the way that the program works, for complete streets, to receive, grant funding from the state to implement the items on the prioritization plan. So first of all, they have to be on the plan. If they're not on the plan, they're not eligible for funding. You're able to update the plan through the same process that's used to establish the plan. So you need sort of MassDOT approval. They're gonna require certain information for each project you put on there. I can say that in our case, a lot of the projects on the plan, we've been chipping away at them sort of piecemeal through other projects, and I'm currently going through the plan to sort of check off any boxes for what we've managed to accomplish without the funding. But you can max out the level of funding every 3 years. And up until this point, the complete streets plan was, I believe, put in place in the 17. So it's only been 2 cycles.
So we actually didn't have our phase 2 done until 2020. It was like one of the very last meetings before COVID hit was our public engagement process to develop our our list of priorities, our prioritization plan. So we've only had 1 round of funding for the priorities to actually implement the plan.
Right, so we've only gotten the money once, and the current plan is to sort of engage with an update to the existing plan to remove anything we've accomplished, tweak based on shifting priorities, and to include the downtown Great Plain Avenue project in the prioritization plan so that it'll be eligible for funding. So we're going to need quite a bit of funding for the project. So it is being actively looked at, updated. It's been implemented in pieces. It's been a guiding document. So but there's, we're planning on updating it in the near future. It's just something I want to mention.
I don't want to speak for James, but is he talking about like, there's the complete streets, the policy, there's the prioritization plan, but like the policy, is he asking like, are we using the current policy that's in place, which is, I think in order to get the funding, we had to have the policy, which says that we do complete streets every single time we rebuild a road. But is he talking about like, are we doing that, or are we working just on the prioritization?
So I take your point. In this case, he specifically said prioritization plan.
All right.
But one of the prerequisites for that prioritization plan was sort of codifying those principles by town leadership. Certainly it's something that we try to work into every project. But the prioritization plan actually having specific called out projects is something that is useful. So it'll be in parallel to the street design guide and work hand in hand with that.
Any other questions for Travis, Justin, Paul?
Right, well, thanks for having me. I really do appreciate the feedback. It's very helpful. We'll work on revising this list of tasks and fleshing it out. I'll work with Tyler on that and with incorporating these comments, and we'll then work to get you the scope of work and to then move forward with hiring a consultant.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I think it's a great start.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Travis.
Thanks, Travis.
Thank you.
And, all right, so then, next on our agenda is the update on the Dedham Ave and Webster Street projects.
Yeah, so we'll start with Dedham Avenue. The sidewalk expansion under the MBTA bridge has been completed. And temporary lane markers have been put down. We are expecting the beginning of the paving process to start the first week of August. The contractor will be in to mechanically mill the roadway in preparation for a new mat of asphalt. We are still waiting on the components for the RFB flashing crosswalk beacons at George Agate Road for the crosswalk at that location. But all the other sort of sidewalk level improvements have been completed. So once the paving happens, shortly thereafter, the paving markings will go in. There'll be, there'll be a permanent shift in the lane under the bridge to accommodate the expanded sidewalk. We think that, just preliminarily from, the sidewalk's been there a few weeks now. We haven't had any issues with safety or anything like that. I've gotten comments from residents that appreciate the fix. It's been a long time coming. It's really, prior to the improvement, it was really not a realistic thing to go under the bridge on foot.
Can I just ask out of pure curiosity what the width was before and what it is now?
I think it was like 3 feet or something, and then we pushed it out to 5.
It's awesome. I've walked under there hundreds of times and I'm very excited for this.
It's a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
improvement.
When I first saw it, there were probably two kids on bikes riding under there from DeFazio and a family on a bike. Like the first day it was there, I walked down to check it out. So people are using it.
Yeah, yeah, so I think that it'll be even more it'll be more effective from a traffic calming perspective once the permanent line marks go down, and it's a little bit more of a visual pinch. Right now with the temporary, it's a little bit more freeform. So yeah, so paving's coming soon. And then for other folks have been asking me about the speed limit change that we've been pursuing. Engineering is still working on that. It appears that it's not as easy as simply taking down the 40 and putting up a 30. We'll have to work with the speed zone that is this area out here, and sort of the signage as it relates to the speed zone. So it's something that we're still developing, but hope to have everything sorted out by the time that project's complete.
I have a technical question. How does this get communicated to the navigation and the more modern cars which show the speed limit on the dash?
So I believe it would be pushed out through the state because they have to approve every change. If it is not, then it can be communicated through the police department. I can follow up on that.
I'm just curious, because at one point, my car showed a higher speed limit on Webster Street than there was. And I think that was a technical glitch.
What was it showing?
35, I think. Or it was showing, it was showing a 5 mile an hour difference. I don't know which way it was.
Gotcha.
It no longer does that. It's.
Yeah.
So I
Well, they must-
believe,
Some mechanism for coordinating that. I'm just curious.
I believe a lot of them use AI and decipher photo imagery, and that's actually how they come up with speed limits and navigation systems. It's not Like there's all sorts of disclaimers. It's not legally binding. It's just advisory on behalf of the navigation system. That being said, I know we really haven't done much with it, but we have like become an official partner with Waze as far as they have like a government login component where we can, like when we've had roads that have been shut. So when we had the bridge over the Charles shut on Chestnut Street, you can actually permanently shut that down or even put like your construction hours in to reroute traffic. And Waze and Google are partners. So I imagine we could probably do it through our partnership with Waze and at least push it to that. I mean, those are two of the largest navigation systems that I think most people use.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, so that's it for Dedham Avenue.
There's no, vertical treatments on Dedham Ave, it's just painted, right? There's nothing, no.
There are no vertical treatments outside of the installation of the granite curtain. And then there will be, I mean, it's not a traffic calming element, there will be more narrow lane markings to accommodate bike lane on the east. On the northbound side.
Another question with regard to that, not just Great Plains, but also some of the other in Dedham. I know some communities, and even here near the high school, there are pedestrian markers in the center of the street. We use barrels near the high school, but some communities like Brookline have an actual pole with a sign on it in the middle of the street. Is that regulated in a meaningful way, and do they make a difference?
So we had those in a couple locations. One thing I will say is that from a maintenance perspective, they can be problematic because they're constantly getting hit by cars.
I'm not surprised.
As to their efficacy, I'm not sure. What I will say is that we've taking that same plaque and installing them on the crosswalk signs as an alternative. Certain areas with really wide crossings, I think it's most appropriate to have something in the center when you're most likely to be focusing your attention away from the side of the road where the signs are. It's something that we have the ability to purchase, but for the most part, when it's come up, it's because they've been hit, they've been destroyed, we have to replace them. But they can be used as a sort of intermediary step between for a really wide crossing if we are piloting or planning on putting in some sort of refuge, looking to sort of act as a mid-road element to alert drivers that there's crossings.
Thanks.
Yeah. So Webster Street, some people, we pushed out some updates on that through the town newsletter last week. There was a little bit of confusion as to whether or not work was completed. So the work that has been completed up until this point is the ADA compliant ramps along the length of the project. There were some curb line changes at the intersection of Webster and Rosemary Street to create shorter crossing distances for pedestrians and a bit of a tighter slight reduction in width of in that area on Webster Street. There have been the raised crosswalks have been paved with a sort of base layer of 2 inches. The final 3-inch elevation will be achieved through the when paving happens. Right now, we are forecasting the paving to occur probably in September at night. So it's going to be an interesting process. We have another round of paving going on in August, but we weren't able to squeeze in a third round before school started. So obviously after the paving, the line markings will go in for the narrower lanes. There's also going to be painted medians along a portion of the road. So basically the the lane width will go into the shoulder, so the actual width of the lanes will not narrow at those points, but it'll create a visual effect that there is narrowing, along with the entire stretch of the road will be reduced to 10.5-foot lanes. So the traffic calming elements will be put in paint, and then the raised crosswalks will be completed when the paving goes through. So
That's 3 inches higher than they are now. Will be the final grade of those.
3 inches higher than they were currently, or than they were before we did anything.
So an inch
So-
taller than now.
An inch taller than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
If they were 5 inches tall, that would be pretty disruptive.
That's like a Trader Joe's speed bump. Anyways,
Yeah.
the Tyler, what about the speed zone? Safety zone, sorry.
Safety zone, yep. So, that's just like with Dedham Avenue, when, the work is completed, that'll, we'll have demonstrated that there are traffic calming elements in place. We'd like to monitor the resulting changes in speed. We took up a 4 condition, speed study reading, and then we'll do so again after the project's completed to see if there's a significant difference. And then at that time, we can evaluate how soon we can implement the safety zone, but it is still the plan to do so.
Question, I was driving on Manning during rush hour one afternoon, or actually crossing Manning, and I actually had to wait longer than I thought I would. Several cars doing a pretty good clip, you know, on Manning, and I'm wondering whether there's a way of keeping an eye on that, or we're just gonna probably hear from people if it's a real problem.
So you're saying since the speed bumps went, or the crosswalks went in?
That's not.
You think they're avoiding the
Yeah.
Webster?
That's my suspicion. I have no basis.
Well, they're probably avoiding Webster due to traffic or like gas.
There's been construction.
Gas on, man, and yeah, I mean,
There's so much going on, it's real hard to.
Yeah, Manning also has had construction going on as well. I think we all anticipate that there'll be it's something to keep an eye on, and it might be a slight spillover effect, but it doesn't have the same through line connectivity that Webster does, so you'd have to make more turns if you chose to go that way.
There were a lot of detours onto Manning in the last few weeks, so that may explain part of it.
Yeah, it's also a more naturally narrow street. So we do have speed studies from Manning in the last in recent years, and we can do an after condition analysis as well.
I had one question that just came to mind. If you're paving an additional inch, aren't you also paving an additional inch on the approach? Or are you going to be paving and then adding on top of that? Because if it's just adding an inch of pavement on top of the entire current way, you're not really increasing the size of the bump.
you're gonna mill and then hit, like, you're gonna mill.
We're milling.
So you're going to mill
around-
it down, right? And then, so the pavement will go on top of the current bump that's been done. So it will be an inch on top. I'm just trying to think if you're just like adding an inch to the entire thing, but you're going to be milling down before the bump and after the bump, right? And then putting an inch.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So the approach to the bump, to the raised crosswalk, will be filled in back to the grade at which it is now.
Okay. Yep.
Then the extra inch will
Got it.
be built on top of the crosswalk, and then it'll taper back to meet the grade, the existing grade.
Will have
Okay,
a
thank
similar. The angle will be similar to what it is now, or is it gonna be more gradual? You're tapering it.
So the profile of it will not change. It'll just be the overall height of the picture. Because the incline was done to specification matching the incline of the final product. So I think that, you know, we've gotten pretty good feedback as to, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be, and people are appreciative of. The town addressing. The speeding, the safety issues there. So this is kind of a good. Intermediate step, so that once we take it up to the final 3 inches, I mean, it won't be that perceptible, but. You know, just kind of proof of concept that it's not the end of the world to put some elevated elements in there.
Yeah, it came out much better than I thought it would.
Yeah, yeah, so and the other thing to just to reemphasize is that. The markings that are currently out there on the speed bumps and on and around are temporary. The signage there is temporary. We've ordered permanent signage that will alert drivers to the presence of the raised crosswalks. Well in advance, so that they have time to slow down.
Right.
Anything else? Okay, so we'll move on. Continued discussion, sidewalk maintenance plan and removal pilot.
Does somebody have their hand up? Oh, Justin did.
Oh, sorry, Justin.
No, that was
Go ahead.
from before. I didn't put it back down.
Sorry, we didn't see you.
Thank you, though.
Continued discussion, sidewalk maintenance plan removal pilot. I guess we discussed a little bit with Travis a few minutes ago, but does anybody have any thoughts?
I think I laid out my thoughts pretty substantially last time, so.
Well, I owe you guys an answer, but I don't have one yet about the subdivisions.
Okay.
So we continue.
So I did take a look kind of from like 1,000 feet to see like where some of these streets might be. I took a pretty comprehensive look of like the whole town, and I found about 5 miles of road that I think you could potentially make an argument that you can remove half of the sidewalk from.
Sounds like you're doing our work for us.
Assuming that I could only find 5 miles, maybe there are 10 miles, would be like probably the maximum amount that you would find. There's an 80 miles of sidewalks. Is 10 miles enough to make it worthwhile to go in and have a program and remove them and talk to residents? Is 10 miles of sidewalk sufficient to like make a program worth it?
It's a great question.
I looked like it's, you know, you can find a road and it looks like it's gonna be great, and you measure it and it's like 300 feet. And then you get to the next one and you measure it again, and it's like 500 feet. So like it doesn't really, you know, the miles don't add up.
That's a very good question. Yeah, I mean, I have an artificial rule of thumb that I found works in an amazing number of places. If you sort of go from a kind of no-brainer, you know, quick to guess to just thinking of looking at the map and sort of, oh, that's, yeah, no, that's obviously a good candidate. That if you really bear down and say, I'm trying to do all I can possibly find, very often you end up, you double that. I think the actual fact is probably 4 maybe. That if you spend a lot of time, a lot of money looking at it, you might find 20 miles. But so some of the principle, the question is dead on in terms of, you know, do you pick a section and do a detailed study of that to get a sense of what that proportion is, but.
There are a significant amount of roads that already have one sidewalk. So like a lot of them, I went in like, oh, this would be a good road, and I went and looked at it just on Google Maps, so things may have changed. And those roads already had either no sidewalk or one sidewalk. There's like Country Lane has 2 sides that are not continuous. So like that would be a good candidate for making like one side continuous. And you know, maybe making an agreement with the other side. I did see like on that street, there's a brand new house, and it's the only house on the side that has a sidewalk. So assume the builder put the sidewalk there for a reason. And so there may be either an argument that it was required, or like the residents may say like that was a value add in having a sidewalk in front of my house. And so, you know, you may walk into a, you know, like a property value situation like happened on Warren Street, removing a sidewalk in front of the house. So
Yeah, I think that would be adjudicated through this process. I think that's a piece of the program as it would be built out. I think that there's, from the maintenance standpoint, I take your question. First of all, I mean, it may be that it's 5, it may be that it's more, I don't know. But we have a lot of requests for extending sidewalk, connection points that, for instance, the Edgewater neighborhood over to this intersection, Dedham South. These connection points, there's many of them. Many of them are not very long. It could be that it goes a long way if we're able to sort of trade redundant sidewalk for these connectors. But in terms of the overall maintenance backlog, I take your point there. I think we can't even really. We haven't even really decided on how candidates will be picked, right? So it's tough to say what the net change would be.
Yeah, it would be, I assume it'd be slowly over time because
Yeah,
as you do a neighborhood, and you hit that street, it's planned for the year, it's okay, well, how many miles of sidewalk can we do this
yeah.
year? How many do you do a year? How many miles a year?
We're budgeted for under a mile, I think.
Under a mile.
I was gonna say like 2, but maybe we probably did more than we were budgeted for, but.
Yeah, so I mean, that mile, I guess you'd say, well, can we move half a mile at a time a year, I don't know
Yeah,
what the amount would be, but.
yeah, no, I mean, if the only result of the program is that over time we slowly standardize the sidewalk so that it's on one side, so that it's in a constructible location that's easier to maintain, that might be a win, even if we're not reducing the actual mileage overall. You know what I mean? Because as it stands, we'll have a section of sidewalk on one side of the road that's in really bad shape and it's non-continuous, and then there's another section that's pretty much okay, and then another section that's really bad shape on the other side. It makes it very difficult operationally to plan which, are you just gonna do all the sidewalks on the whole street, which is obviously the most expensive option, but up until this point, it's kind of been like at our discretion as to what needs it the most. Maybe like if one side of the sidewalk is being buckled by tree roots, how are we gonna justify putting resources into that if we think that it'll just get buckled again in a few years' time? So I think it's a legitimate question.
I would also go even further and like the why component of it. And we have not done neighborhood sidewalks for a very long time as far as doing like an actual maintenance and reconfiguration program. And I think one of the things that we are struggling with on the public works side is where do we start? Like what, there are, dozens of miles of road of sidewalk constructed pretty much all at exactly the same time, deteriorating at almost all the exact same rate. And we're only budgeting for about a mile of road, a mile of sidewalk. So it's like, well, what mile do we start with and what neighborhood do we start with? And I think even coming up with a process for that would be helpful. Because I think that's been one of the things that has been challenging. And I know Tyler's been putting a lot of our resources, rightly so, into making our roads compliant with accessibility when it comes to the ramping systems. But we really have not done much to address the connection points between those ramps. We've really been addressing the ramps themselves. So I think even just trying to figure out like what's the process or what's like, how do we start? How do we, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. What's that first bite and how do we get there? I think that's something that we're struggling with on an operations side.
One of the things that we might overlook is the permeability aspect of places where the sidewalks are less developed, but our paths, because that's permeable surface in a lot of those places.
Yeah, so it's a trade-off because in a lot of it, in some areas, and we're planning to do more, we're going to be reducing the pavement area. And I think we would gladly trade some additional, sidewalk network, connectivity for reducing, pavement at intersections and other things like that, so. It's definitely something to keep in mind. That's one of the biggest benefits of reducing these really wide intersections. The permeability is also a factor to look at.
There are some parks that are on town land that have sidewalks that are kind of, some of them are buried, so. That's a good place to start.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
There's one park where the curb ramps are really, really bad. And their sidewalk has been removed in the park on one point, I could tell from Google Maps. So there was sidewalk on part of the park and it was removed to replace, and there's still an existing sidewalk. But
Paul is using the whiteboard.
Sorry, I was trying to look for a chat function, but this is the best I could find. I don't know how to exit it. Sorry. Oh, there we go. Sorry.
But this particular park, the curb ramps are really bad in the neighborhood and they're, you know, but I think the neighborhood could probably give up that, like, it's only 100 feet or so of sidewalk, but they would give it up if you went in and fixed their curb ramps.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, so I guess the idea would be, we can make that sort of tit for tat arrangement. But it would be much more preferable to have a program that prescribes what the process is. So that when somebody calls me and says, the sidewalk in front of my house is in really poor shape, when are you gonna get to it? I have a legitimate answer for them. I can say, this is the program that we have. If you're interested in, sort of getting us to prioritize this location, these are the requirements, this is how the program works. Because as of now, without the sort of the guardrails that we've been using up until this point, or the school walking routes. Once we've reached, we're pretty much at the end of the line, obviously we'll have to go back and go back to the beginning of the list and start repairing again. But we don't really have a prioritization plan outside of those heavily used high volume pedestrian routes. So there are multiple goals that I guess we're trying to accomplish with the program, and reducing inventory is one of those goals, but not the only one.
So I think, I'm sorry, so I think a couple of things that have come to mind. One is when because I did kind of do what Tim had done and looked and saw, is that juice worth the squeeze, the lemon worth the squeeze on our total inventory of 130 miles, and we have about 8 to 10 miles of actual ones that we give up. I think it's been discussed that, perhaps it is, especially in the beginning, as we, have our 1 mile a year budget, perhaps reducing, some of those roads might be more fruitful earlier on in this process. But I think the prioritization is, I think, the more important parts. Prioritization and policy, which Tyler was talking about. School walking routes are going to be changing anyways, because High Rock is going to be turning into a neighborhood school. So that's going to be changing the access to High Rock. Some of that is okay, but there's other areas that I think would be school walking routes. Because you'd have more of what Newman area now coming to High Rock. So I think obviously we need to reevaluate that going forward. But from a prioritization perspective, we do need to be careful to not say that we're going to do Countryway first, or the instinct, because every single one of those homes is $3 million versus what about off of Manning or what other areas. So we do have to look about equity. I can't say right now what that answer is, but I think we need to be cognizant of that. As we go forward to say, okay, school routes has been the number one priority. Second priority is going to be, what about, secondary arterial routes from this other program that we're doing, if we're looking at A street, red, green, blue street, should the streets that feed into B streets, should those be, something that we look into from a prioritization perspective, so that when people say to Tyler, what about my sidewalk? Well, we do have a program that says that roads that feed into blue streets, are going to be candidates for, fixing the sidewalk and reevaluating. So I think we need to kind of look at it using some of the stuff that we're doing from this grant and this program. I think that might be useful. Just my 2 cents. And I have a couple other dimes and nickels, but I'll hold up until.
So I think that's a good point. But the other thing is that if, say the approach of these feed into this blue street, so they should be prioritized. That is true, and I think that's a good, sort of element that should be pursued, but that's always going to leave out, there's always going to be streets in these residential areas that are low volume that we're just never going to touch them, so it's.
And that may be, that's part of, that's kind of, well, at least we have to have a criteria, because right now the criteria is a tit for tat kind of going in and going, sure, do we have the budget for it or not? At least we're then adhering to a program. We can modify that program. We can reevaluate that program going forward, because this is a long game. But at least it is a shot in the dark, it's a program. It's a prioritization. Now, I'm not saying that's what we need to achieve and do, but I'm saying that we need to kind of look at something that we need to be thoughtful about how we do this, because we need to, the optics of just, fixing Countryway or fixing, a road that, we think is easy, but in reality that the optics of that are bad. Because what does Countryway dump into an area that doesn't really have a sidewalk? Well, it does have a sidewalk now. It does, because it didn't have last year. But nonetheless, also, do we need to, look at, and this kind of goes into other things that we've talked about as a town, do we need to look at the extension of the, rail trail? Because that's access into the city, into the town, you know what I mean? And then that takes pressure off people saying that they can't walk into town on the sidewalks that don't exist, but we can take the rail trail and dump it right into Junction and then take a sidewalk all the way up to the town. But this kind of goes into that, holistic thinking about what we can do, to enable access to the town center that isn't always considered just sidewalks.
Yeah. I almost think there needs to be like two parallel things, because a prioritization plan is just never going to prioritize the areas that are targeted by the removal.
Sure.
You're gonna fix the. I can't.
Because that was the struggle that when I was sort of looking at this was the other municipalities, they have sort of calculations as to a given segment of sidewalk has this R score that's calculated using proximity to points of interest. It's sort of, if it's what sort of road is it categorized? Is it a collector, an arterial? And then that assigns it a score, so it's like relative importance, right? These ones that are in these residential neighborhoods are never going to score high on those factors by their nature. So it almost feels like there needs to be a separate thing that captures that in parallel with prioritizing because it's almost like saying, how do we justify a more a cost intensive rehabilitation that is not going to be as big of a net benefit as doing the same work on a piece of sidewalk that gets 3 times the pedestrian volume. So how do you make that both feasible and so that it's achieving some goal rather than just.
I mean,
yeah,
that's perfectly valid. And you could say out of your totality of 100%, you say 33% of what you're doing or whatever you're going to do is going to go toward rehabbing the small local routes that will never get paved, they'll never get fixed, but at least you're budgeting toward that, and as well as in tandem doing the roads that you're going to get more benefit from. And at the same time, also, I agree that, we also have to, I realize the fiscal situation in this town, but it might be worth also as well, keep on championing to get more money from town meeting. Because I think that we've been kind of stuck at the schools are getting significantly more money. Other areas, I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that we have gone through significant growth on our infrastructure, and I don't necessarily think the spending on that infrastructure has been matched by the amount of growth that's been going on. So I think the reality is we all dump money into the schools, but we have to take a look at and see what our infrastructure is, and that's something that obviously a conversation of Karis needs to broker with Kate and town meeting. But I think the reality is that that also needs to happen as well.
Yeah, it becomes easier to budget if we have a defined program and a defined process for.
Yep.
For how.
FinCom will love that if you actually have a definitive program. So this is one of those outputs could be to help be able to justify asking for more.
Yeah, yep.
So you're looking for more of a way to prioritize the sidewalks we're going to rebuild, like in a meaningful manner, or I guess that's where it's like the disconnect is, are we going after removal, or are we going after like proper sidewalk maintenance, right? Developing a proper network. So
Yeah,
it's tough.
I don't think we necessarily are gonna leave this room with the answer to that question, but I think that it should have some parallel aspect, like what roads are prioritized, but there's also this parallel program that allows us to make sure that these other roads have some method of getting to the top of the list, because otherwise they'll just never be at the top of the list. It's really tricky, but. But I think it's a fair question to say, what is the actual system-wide? Could we identify which locations would be candidates and put that into, work out the math to see what that would actually accomplish from an inventory side perspective.
Our charge for this committee is like transportation planning based, so that's why I think the walking routes and kind of what Justin's talking about, it's your transportation planning is where people are walking, not where a few people are walking. So I don't know if like the sidewalk removal or the residential sidewalk replacement plan is like in a different bucket than your transportation, like pedestrian planning. Two buckets. Is that something that would kind of work? And then you have a residential dead end street sidewalk fund where, that's where they get you work out of that bucket for the residential streets so that they get something, but hopefully the buckets are full.
Yeah, I guess it's like there's two sort of two goals, right? There's the sort of top-down goal of how do we prioritize where to allocate our sidewalk rehabilitation resources, and then there's the sort of bottom-up goal of I'm a resident, I live on a residential street, and I want to be able to walk as part of my everyday life to and from my house, and the sidewalks here are in disrepair, and I don't have an answer as to when they will be repaired. Like, I think that is transportation policy related.
Yeah, potential. I don't know. I don't know if I see it. So I think maybe separating them would be the best way to get those residents to the top. And then having a like a separate sidewalk plan that is, like Chestnut Street sidewalks are terrible, they need to be replaced because that's a pedestrian,
Right,
that's where businesses will benefit from it, and that's where,
right,
people will walk, but no one's gonna be walking on, like Edgewater Drive, except for the, 15 or 20 houses that are on that one, or whatever this road is over here, that live on that street, that's just them. Something else is maybe, like Chestnut Street or downtown, or kind of as you go out there, there would be more people using those sidewalks. So,
Demand based.
yeah, I mean, but I do understand that there's, equity in people who live on these streets and have terrible sidewalks. But is it like a residential? Like just a different bucket than where we're targeting for, like improved access to transit, based,
yeah,
our sidewalks there.
yeah, no, I'm agreeing in that. I think they're two distinct but parallel things.
Okay.
Because I think if you try to mix them together, it becomes very difficult to ever prioritize these edge cases, so.
Can we separate that in the capital plan? Can it be like 1 million for sidewalk, like, pedestrian, like trend, I don't know. like
What do we?
Pedestrian plan side, it's $1 million, like it's about $1 million for sidewalks, right? It's like $800 or $900 for sidewalks, and I think it goes up a little bit for each year.
It's like $500,000, it depends on, because it's all lumped into our. Public Works infrastructure funding, and a portion of that is sidewalks. A little bit less than $500,000. This is per year. But we're not always assured that we're going to get that funding. We had, the other portion of the infrastructure funding is for road resurfacing, and this year. Due to budget constraints, we did not receive that allocation. So we only received the sidewalk allocation. But I think if there was like. The residential sidewalk program. And this is how much money we would need to implement it. That becomes something that's. We could fund through its own thing. The money all ends up in the same place anyway, it's kind of for us to work on that
To
part.
move those residents to the top of the list, like that's the only.
Yeah, it's just the actual like process, the actual. What, if you're a resident, a group of residents. And you want to make this happen, how do you do it, rather than just kind of calling me every day until. I get sick of you and then I say that this is the road the street that we're gonna do this year.
I don't know if the betterment mechanism is a way to achieve this. Or not.
Yeah, so maybe for the next meeting, I can bring some examples of what other municipalities do, because a lot of them do use that sort of system where it's like a cost sharing system.
Petition and then betterment. On that.
Yeah,
Resident.
I don't know if such a system would have legs in Needham, but
I
that
don't
is
think
what a
it'll be
lot.
wildly popular, but it might be a way to achieve it on. Especially those neighborhoods which are more rural and more affluent.
Yeah, don't they have something like that in Newton? They have
Yeah, Newton,
cost sharing.
Newton's betterment program is sidewalk and curbing, it's for installation of sidewalk and curbing.
Of new.
Of new, it's not for maintenance or removal or anything.
Right,
It's all
but
just
you
for-
could. There are places where people may want sidewalks, so we don't have them.
In Belmont, where I used to live, there was something where the default for when they maintain it or replace it or something was, is that a type of, it's like dark.
Yeah.
But then each house could pay if they wanted granite. So just after we moved out, our condo association decided to put granite, but so it changes by house. I don't know, that seems like it could get really complicated. But, that's just, towns are doing it.
Now, there was, the town I grew up in Ohio had a similar for maintenance. Where when they would come in and evaluate a sidewalk, if they determined the sidewalk needed to be repaired or the apron needed to be repaired. They would notify the resident and then the resident would either hire their own contractor to repair it or the town would repair it. And split the cost 50% between the property owner and the town.
I think.
And that was their approach to maintaining the sidewalks. Now, again, whether we
I
here
don't think that
have
would be
an
widely
appetite
followed.
or if we ever want to try that, but there are communities that use those options, but
There are some that when you sell a house, you have to sell it with either paying or fixing the sidewalk before you.
like new, similar to has an ordinance, the city
Sidewalk
ordinance
ordinance.
where if you install a new house, if you're building a new house, the city engineer can determine whether or not you have to put brand new curbing or sidewalk in, so it's part of the permit review, and then the city engineer can say, as part of this permit, you're putting brand new sidewalk and brand new curbing in, so it's kind of a strategy that Newton's used also to maintain some of those older sidewalks.
I don't know what the priority is, but it might be worth getting some information about what comparable communities do to deal with this issue. We can't be the only ones.
So I did do some research last week and I was not able to find something like removal program. I did find many instances of cost sharing. You know, the cities and towns where residents will be reimbursed, things like that. That seems to be a lot more common. One of the challenges of that is that if you're just talking about, okay, we're gonna remove one side and then we're gonna rehabilitate the other side and money is not changing hands. It's a lot less complicated than. You know, when you get money involved and then you can't just have just a couple of houses on the street. Sign on. You know, so it basically would be like accepting a new public way. It would have to work like that, where everybody has to chip in and agree to contribute. And there might be, so the bar for collective participation is a little higher. And it's also, because we can't just do. The other thing you have to keep in mind is that in order to actually schedule the sidewalk work to happen, it has to be a large enough area for the contractor to come in and mobilize and make their money, you know. We can't kind of be like, oh, well, this little cul-de-sac here and this little piece there, because they'll never go for that. And it would be very challenging for DPW.
Is the town still accepting private ways?
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
still in the process of that. Should that be stopped? Like, is that a problem if we continue to take on private ways?
I mean, it comes with. It's not like they become a public way and then. All of the costs are borne by us, without the benefits, so, you know, they become a full participant in the town's, revenue and everything else like that, the offsets, so. They're using their own money for the betterment, so.
Just
No.
to fix the road, but then we get the road, and maybe I just don't know enough about it, but like. We get the road, we get their sidewalks, and then those sidewalks, like the maintenance for that is. Not feasible, right? Like even though it's like, oh, we paid to fix the road and here it is, we have it, it's a shiny new road, but then. You know, 10 years down the line, we're working, now we have 2 more miles of sidewalk that we're dealing with, and we could have, just left it as a private road.
Yeah, I mean, we're not,
I don't know.
a lot of times they're not very large pieces of street. And we're not accepting a ton of roads every year, but I see your point in that it is an additional maintenance responsibility.
Do we have a policy of going after private roads? I'm not aware that we do. I mean, maybe
We have a policy for accepting private ways as
for
part of-
accepting, but do we try to get private ways to convert to public ways?
No,
So,
because it's resident driven,
right,
the residents have to.
and they have to get it up to the standard we would accept.
Right,
So the cost is on them.
Except for when we have to maintain that sidewalk in 20 or 30
If it's a
years.
private road, we're not maintaining it.
Well, that would mean that the town takes the road, it's no longer private roads.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a private road anymore.
Yeah.
So now we're taking it, it's like, you know, someone gives you a boat.
It's like with the state routes that they're giving back to the town. They get it up to a standard. And then we accept it and then we have to maintain it.
yeah, there's an added
Oh,
financial burden.
Okay,
There is.
alright,
Interesting.
I think there are 3 private ways that are up for acceptance in the cycle.
I don't want to disappoint that.
But they all combine to be, it's not a very long stretch, but it is.
Yeah, I mean, if that, I don't know how many there's, but there are a few of them out there because when I looked, I could see.
There were 2 different kinds too.
Yeah, there's the red and the blue ones. Literally red and blue streets.
The ones that get plowed and the ones that don't.
Right.
Alright, so any other comments? Any other issues not anticipated by the chair?
Might I ask, are we still planning on having Mary Tenenbaum come to the next meeting? Is that still the 12th?
Yeah. So we haven't
Yes.
discussed,
Then we discussed the date, but tentatively, we have, yeah. We are engaging with Mary Tenenbaum, who's a resident from West Roxbury, who approached Duncan about extending the orange line into Needham. And Duncan spoke with Kevin Keen at the select board and suggested that we have bring them in for a meeting to give us 15 minutes or 20-minute, just what they're looking for as far as.
So we sort of thought about doing it towards the top so that she.
Yeah, we should come right
wouldn't
in
have to
first.
stay.
Yeah, first item.
And I have no idea whether, we have any intention of saying anything other than thank you for telling us what you're about.
Yeah, I don't think there's much to say more than thank you for the.
I mean, there are some historical facts that we could share, like there was a proposal in the 1960s and 70s to do that, which didn't happen. It's not high on MBTA's list of priorities. Whenever we've talked about, the other part of that is to do the green line extension from Elliott to Needham. And the specific proposal they seem to be advocating is doing both of those, with the orange lines in Needham and then have the green line meet it. And then you don't need commuter rail anymore. And there are a lot of people who find the commuter rail a really good solution, and these other solutions would, if you do the math, would be slower. I just don't know if we want to get into that.
Well, I think that if it came from the chair of the select board. It's,
Yeah, he was only saying, in fact,
We suggested we just talk with them, so.
yeah, so we're doing it as a courtesy to him and to her. We can always listen.
Yeah.
If we hear anything of interest, we can let Kevin know, who represents the select board.
Yes.
okay, so.
Yeah, I don't think we're
Pretty
gonna,
much a one-way flow. We hear what
Yeah, we,
she's doing.
can
we
hear-
don't make
Right.
policy, right? It's the select board that makes the policy.
that's the next meeting in August.
And that is, right now, that is the 12th though, or not, or do we have another date?
that would be our traditional date. That would
Yeah.
be the date.
So I'm sorry I was late, but I came to try to make sure I didn't get
Yeah.
this, that coordination with her messed up.
Yeah, so we can, I know that August is sometimes tricky for people, so I think.
August
I'll-
12th?
Yeah,
I'm available.
might just send out an email just to say this will be the projected next date. Giving everyone a heads up, if you're not able to make it, just let us know.
So I don't know whether we have to, we have to put that on the agenda or not.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll put our seat. Yeah.
Yeah.
one other thing I wanted to mention just before we wrap up, James had sort of included in his list of things, that we should in some manner, get around to addressing trail related topics at some point.
The, I know that the design guide for Minneapolis does have a trail design section in it, so I think
Yeah.
that is partly there and, so I think that like trails and off-street paths are maybe fit in there.
Yeah,
There are certain places, I guess, we could add them,
yeah.
and so that would be a good spot.
Yeah.
It's a
You know,
great topic.
he has, the rail trail group, they have these larger goals, and I guess they would just be looking for some assistance and support on keeping the ball rolling on different projects that have been long running.
So the kind of on top of that, the select board has, in their goals, they had a goal setting meeting, and in there are like 4 or 5 action items that were deferred to the mobility planning coordination committee in August of last year. And so they discussed them recently. I don't remember exactly. I thought I wrote them down, but that is included, I think it's included in there, like talking about the rail trail extension. I think that maybe was deferred to us.
They're having a goals meeting tomorrow, I believe.
They had a discussion about it last week and it's in the agenda for tomorrow. There are 4 or 5 action items that they were looking for information for. And they also want to have a meeting, I guess, with our committee at some point to find out what we're doing. A lot of it's bikes, like they want to know where bikes are fitting into plan and where's the network. I believe. And so we'll probably maybe put that on the agenda for next meeting.
Yeah,
They'll vote or whatever, put the document in and we'll discuss that at the next agenda.
sounds good.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
Roll call, yeah, Justin McCollum,
Aye.
Paul Moulton,
Aye.
Duncan Allen,
Yes.
Mo Handle,
Aye.
chair votes aye. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
So on the sidewalks, now that we're not meeting,